Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 468th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. They go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter we'll listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes here at the podium to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment and closes the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, there's time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Now's the time to do it. You got any announcements?
No, not right now.
No? No announcements? I can't believe it.
I can tell my joke.
Oh, come on up here.
All right, this is always time for a joke, but this is a true story. There's a nightclub in the north of England in Durham. Anyway, the floor was so grotty and grimy that, but they liked that, and so they, on the above the door going out, they had a sign saying, "Please wipe your feet on the way out."
Any other announcements? Now's the time. No? All right. Well, next week is the philosophies of time and their respective perceptions. It's August 3rd. That's Patrick McElroy. He'll be our speaker. On August 10th, why Trump must be impeached. That's Kenneth Williams. He'll be our speaker. I'm not going to read all this. You've got an itinerary there. It's all on it. August 17th, reflections on the concept of race, racial ideas, and racism. That's Janet Lee. She's a PhD in anthropology and a Mandarin teacher. She'll be here to talk about that. August 24th, solving a crisis in America today. Gene Lance will be talking about that. And on September. Where is it? Oh.
It's at the bottom of the page.
There we are. September 21st. The next
What happened to?
Well, they're in progress. We've got two speakers lined up there, but I'm trying to get them to give me stuff. Anyway. But on September 21st, Ken Sauter, he's sitting right here, will be our speaker. He'll be talking on his battle with the IRS, so that'll be good. And it'll be illuminating. Mm-hmm. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Calvin Bluiett. He's going to talk about our current foreign policy will isolate us from the rest of the world. He's a government professor at Cedar Valley College. He's going to discuss how President Trump's foreign policy is not working and will isolate America from our allies and the rest of the world. He will analyze President Trump's administration's foreign policy, which seems to be to destroy everything accomplished by President Obama, which focused on diplomacy rather than war. Calvin points out that President Trump has demonized the Paris Accord, the Iran Agreement, immigration, the green policy for children brought to America, which would extend to them legal status in our nation. And President Trump has also demonized our allies who have supported us in all wars we have been involved in, including World War II, Korea, Viet Nam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Further, he points to President Trump extending accolades to Russia and North Korea. Calvin will analyze the preceding wars and agreements, which will prove conclusively that President Trump's foreign policy will isolate America from the rest of the world. He concludes that President Trump is completely out of step with history, the decisions made and carried out since the end of World War II, and President Trump's foreign policy has been bent on total confusion without any victories. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Calvin Bluiett. Watch your footing.
I want to apologize for being late. Everybody I deal with, except the college, I get there on time. But for 34 years, I grew up on a farm, and I wasn't too good at it, but I worked hard at it to please my father. And you get up at 5 and you and you stop when it gets dark. And one thing, if you had a good mule you was flying, you didn't have nothing to think about. You put him where he's supposed to walk, he'd stay there. Time for lunch, he'd stop. So, and day after day after day doing that. So, but anyway, I had to be there on time. And then I went in service. I had to get up at 5 o'clock and, you know, KP and all that stuff that they did, and you know, eat breakfast and go to work at 8. And the day wasn't as long as it was on the farm. And then in my working career, in most places I had to be at work at 8. And so when I retired, I said I was going to get up at 9. And when I would go somewhere, I'll be there when I get there. So I was kind of operating on that. Previously, I gave a report on American foreign policy. And my conclusion there was we've had various principles or theories of foreign policy that we've operated on, actually 4 from the very beginning. And my conclusion was, you know, war is very expensive. Many people get messed up. And I don't know how many of you served in the Army, but when you go through basic training and you go through that infiltration course, it gives you a feel for how it is in the real situation. But it's not, in the real situation, you know, the way that we fight, you know, up until Afghanistan and Iraq, and Korea was different, Vietnam was different, but was still, you know, fighting enemy face to face. In Afghanistan and Iraq, we've been bombing, and most of the things that happened in the last probably 10 years is they just blow up the vehicles. And so that kind of environment really messes up people's mind because they are always under great anxiety because they don't know when it's going to happen. And so it's destructive. And I fear, and when I look at the results, World War II veterans was treated really well, but it helped the nation. And the Servicemen Readjustment Act gave a lot of opportunities to servicemen who was able to survive the war. If they wanted to farm, they loan them money at cheap interest rate to buy a farm, and they pay them $100 a month to do it. If they want to go to college, they would give them $150 a month, pay the tuition, buy the books. And most of those guys fought in the war, but it's not rich people. They were people who was earning the minimum wage. The minimum wage was $75. So if you work for 75 cents an hour for 40 hours, that's just $30 a week. And Social Security and income tax, unless you had a large family, was going to get about 5, so you got 25. So they were better off going to college. They had more money, and they got a degree. And it really had a major positive impact on the economy in the United States. And so after Korea, they still had the Servicemen Readjustment Act, but between Korea and Vietnam, they ceased it. And then after Vietnam started, then they started back giving it, but it was not as generous as it was, because when I got out, it wasn't available, but when the Vietnam War accelerated, I got it, but I was only going in summers, and I only got $100 a month. I got nothing on tuitions and nothing on books. I had to do everything else by myself. So it's a little different. So the point I'm making, American foreign policy is very, very important. America has been a nation that had to trade from the very, very beginning, and even before, because one of the things we had with England was they wanted to tell us who we could trade with, and we didn't like that. Our forefathers didn't like it. So the first thing I want to deal with is some of the history. I just want to re-examine these various, what I call principles of American foreign policy. Foreign policy has to be consistent, and you have to be careful of when you change it. Because when you change it, it creates a lot of anxiety on the people you're dealing with. And the first was isolation. And President Washington, in his final address to the nation, encouraged us to stay out of European entanglements because they seemed like they were constantly fighting. And because a young nation, not a rich nation, and he wanted us to stay out of it. Because we were protected on the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean, and then kind of the western part by the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And with transportation being what it was then, that was a pretty good thing. You wouldn't have, if they got here, they wouldn't be able to bring enough stuff that we couldn't deal with it. And so that lasted, but during that time, you know, the history book doesn't say it, but it kind of deviated from it. We came up first, President Monroe with the Monroe Doctrine, which made a statement they really, if someone had challenged it, they couldn't have enforced it, that Mexico, Central and South America was in our sphere of influence, and nobody else was supposed to be in there. And then later on, the Spanish-American War, because we wanted to, there was things that we wanted from China and other Asian nations in trading. So that was one way of getting there. And that's how we came up with Cuba and you know, Hawaii and things like that. We purchased Alaska from Russia. And so we deviated in that way. Teddy Roosevelt was involved in the Spanish-American War. But I brought up Cuba because Cuba is an issue that we had problems with from the standpoint of some presidents. When Batista defeated, when Castro defeated Batista, the American government rejoiced, and they thought they could get Castro to do what he wanted done. So when he came to America, made his first foreign policy trip to the United States, they were expecting to be in big hotels in New York. He stayed in the African American hotel, and so they, you know, they tried to deal with another, but he wasn't. He had his own agenda. And then before President Eisenhower's term was up, he started this Bay of Pigs, and when Kennedy was elected, he went on, but that was a failure too. It didn't work. And so we just kind of build invisible wall between the United States and Cuba, and to, you know, to let it still exists. So President Obama kind of took the first step to try to get away from that, and President Trump has reversed it. And so that's why I brought up Cuba. Now, the other places is a little bit different. And so when World War I came around, we never really took the initiative. We didn't proact in war, we reacted. And in World War I, we were not involved in the early days. Wilson was the first president with a PhD in political science from Johns Hopkins. He was a dreamer, and he was always coming with ideas to try to eliminate war and the need for war. And he played with all of this, and then when Germany began to use their submarines to blow up our ships, and we was trying to get supplies to our allies before we got involved in war, well, then we were forced to declare war on them. And the interesting thing, in World War I, Japan fought with us. And so, but by the time of World War II, it switched. And so when they got down to the Paris Agreement at the end of World War I, President Wilson had put out, 7 points to be included in that peace agreement. And so the war wasn't quite over. But when they did that, the Germans came up with the white flag. We want the 7 points. But what he wasn't aware of, the agreements that had been reached among the Allies early in the war. And one of those agreements was reparation. Whoever started the war with the loss, they had to pay reparation. And so he was not able to get the European allies to bend on that one. We know what happened as a result of that. Inflation was extremely high in Germany, and we created an environment for Hitler and Mussolini. And so that's what happened as a result. And Wilson came up with the legislation, but he made a political error. He didn't take any Republicans with him when he went to negotiate the peace agreement, all Democrats. And so when he came up with the legal nation, the Senate didn't ratify. And that almost killed him. And he was really unable to perform a great deal afterwards, but I don't think the vice president was what you're going to do at that time. So that's World War I, still under isolation. World War II, we got involved in that similar. And we had Japan, Italy, Germany was the Axis powers that we were fighting. Fighting with the Allies were Chiang Kai-shek in China, but they had a revolutionary war there, and they was kicked into, he ended up being in Formosa, which is now Taiwan. So he wasn't much help. But Russia fought with us in World War II. And we had the ability to manufacture a lot of weapons. I mean, almost every man that was physically able, was 18 to 25, was actually in the war. And it took a lot to take care of. We had rationing and all kinds of things that we had to be accustomed to fight the war, because we were the primary supplier to both France, England, and Russia. You had the Lend-Lease things that we gave them the tools to fight the war with. Hitler made a mistake in going and attacked Russia in the wintertime, and the equipment couldn't stand that cold. Everything froze up on them, and the Russians got it. Another thing about Russia, according to what I've read in history, they really haven't been too successful fighting anyone outside of Russia. But no one hardly has defeated them in Russia. And so, I don't know what people look at that. But anyway, Japan, not the Germans, used their submarines. And we came up with a system. We just had a whole number of ships going in the submarines, under the water. And they couldn't, if they hit one of the ships, we'd get them. And so we were able to get the supplies through that way. But Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and then we declared war on Japan. And so MacArthur was over that theater of the war, and former President Eisenhower was over all the parts. He was in commander of the European theater. Eisenhower had really gotten out of the Army after World War I, and I think he was the president of a college, and then he was called back in. One of his great skills was the ability to get strong-willed people to work together. England had a general named Montgomery. He was strong, and we had Patton. He was terribly strong, but he was able to get those guys to work together, and we won the war. But a great thing that had an impact on the war is when we used the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that put fear in a lot of people. People are still debating whether that was the right thing to do, but we saved a lot of American lives, because Japan was flying their planes into our ships. They were fighting to die, and we were fighting to live. It's a different perception. And but by dropping those two bombs, and those communities still are right. It was painful because it killed a lot of Japanese people. And but perhaps it was necessary, because that kind of helped the war come to an end. I think Germany, but we fought some bitter battles after that time with Germany, but that's what had a major part of it. So after World War II, we didn't want to create the same environment after World War I. So we paid the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, a couple other organizations to deal with it. But when President Truman had former General Marshall as Secretary of State, he came up with the idea of the Marshall Plan. And that was a very efficient plan. We actually made money, because in the Western world, the United States came out of the war being the most powerful nation in the world. We could have worked with anybody. The problem is we worked Russia, we'd have the people want to stay in Russia to occupy it. If you don't occupy it, then you got to fight them again. So we came up with a new foreign policy called containment. And the idea was to contain communism where it was. And when the surrenders took place at the end of World War II, Russia accepted surrender from Germany, and East Germany, and East Berlin, and North Korea, and North Vietnam. And we, the United States, accepted it in West Berlin, and West Germany, South Korea, South Vietnam. And so that kind of split the world up into the communist blocs. And China was kind of, they had gotten through the revolution, and Chiang Kai-shek had just pretty much washed out, because he was in Formosa, what they call it now, but it's even another term. That's still an issue with China. They think that that's part of China. And Great Britain, Hong Kong, they gave it back to them, and they're having problems there now because of their culture of civilization. But that's kind of the history of it. And what happened under the containment was the war with first North Korea, in Korea, because North Korea invaded South Korea, and in order to live up with the containment, we had to get involved. And we had some pretty slick operators. The Security Council of the United Nations, which had already been was ratified by the Senate, they are the one make decisions when they go to war. And any one of the permanent members could veto it. And we were able to catch Russia away one day, and we brought the issue up, and it was voted on, so everybody was there voting for it. And that's how we got the UN involved in North Korea. Because Russia wasn't there, because they would have vetoed it. And similar situation happened in Vietnam. But one of the points I want to make, it seems that we don't learn a great deal from history. And, just because I was in advance, or I was not in advance, I was in ROTC, the colonel was a colonel in North Korea when the white, and he was lieutenant colonel, and the colonels basically do all the work, the generals sign stuff, public relations. But he pointed out that it was the worst wars we had. Very few Americans escaped that were captured in North Korea. They used our things that we have in America, and they didn't pull out toenails or fingernails. They didn't do none of that stuff. And that's what they were expecting. They said, welcome. And they had the guys almost fighting among themselves. And some people decided to stay in North Korea after the armistice had been signed. And he explained how it was during the Korean War. And he pointed out that the Americans would be set up with the guns, and the people just coming. China was participating in that war with men. And they just kept the people coming. And the weapons would melt and they'd overrun them. And so that was a tough war. We hadn't been a Grant in the Civil War. That's kind of his strategy, to just keep them coming. And we had more men, and they had more men in the North, and they had the South. And he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The South didn't want the slaves to get escaped, so they used some of the soldiers to keep them from escaping. So there was fewer people we had to fight, but that was a strategy he used quite well in that war. So moving from, we didn't win the war, we signed an armistice, and that's why we still have problems. And so we moved from that to Vietnam. And so we should have learned something from Korea in Vietnam. France had just been kicked out of Vietnam. And I don't know, in some ways we think we are invincible. And we went in to Vietnam and got involved. And it was no armistice or nothing. We just left in the final analysis. We just left. And in Vietnam, economically is doing pretty well. And we brought a large number of them that were fighting with us here. But the main point, similar to Afghanistan and Iraq, is the people you see in day you would think were your friends. And when darkness came, they were your enemies. So you couldn't really determine a North Korean from a North Vietnam from a South Vietnam. They all look alike. And some of the people who fought in that war earlier, they wanted to play on the propaganda that North Korea played on, and if it was an all-black unit, they wouldn't fire on them too much. But the Americans picked it up, and the white guys began to use something to make themselves look dark, and so they started shooting everybody there. But that war, we just left, and it seemed to work itself out okay. Now, American businessmen are very much involved in trade and dealing with that. So we stayed with containment until we went to Desert Storm. I talked to some gentlemen that knew good generals, and they argued that Colin Powell was one of the better generals that the nation ever had. He had a plan to go into to attack Iraq, get them out of Kuwait, and when he did that plan, when that was done, get out and use sanctions, and that's what they did. After that, we had 9/11. We couldn't get the Afghan people to turn over bin Laden to the United States, and we had a similar problem with Saddam Hussein. Ordinarily, what they would do is use the CIA. The CIA would have got them both within a year, and we wouldn't have created the enemies we have now. But they chose to do something different, and there are different, there are conspiracy theories about that. The decision was not really made, I don't think, by President George W. Bush. I think Dick Cheney, Vice President Cheney, and Rumsfeld. Now, I don't know Vice President Cheney that well. I know that I don't like him. I don't hate him, but I don't like him. But Rumsfeld was once was the director of OEO, and that's how I got to know him. He's very, very wealthy. He's very, very arrogant. So we got involved with these wars, and we've been there almost 15 years, and still there, and we're figuring out how can we get out. That I think we maybe have to do the same thing we did in Vietnam. But this is a lot of money lost, many more men and women that fought in that war, going to have mental illness and things like that, and we don't even know how to treat it. But we got to take care of those people. It's going to cost a lot of money. And the question is, what do we get out of it? Nothing. And so we ought to stay out of wars if we don't get into it. So this happened before President Trump, so he didn't have anything to do with that. Like President Obama didn't have a great deal, but we did pull troops out of both Iraq and Afghanistan during his good administration. Then the ISIS came in, they said we got out too quick. But the leaders of those countries were telling us to get out. Those were their countries, not ours. And so now we see what I'm reading. So that's the history, some of the history. So the next thing I want to look at is an analysis of President Trump's foreign policy action, which will isolate the United States from the rest of the world. I'm going to do some of the more recent. He pulled out of when we signed off on the Iranian agreement. The inspectors were looking, they were staying in compliance. And when President Trump pulled out of that, then it became a problem again. So my point is, when we make a decision, it shouldn't create a problem in order to solve a problem. Now, I don't think we want to have troops on the ground in Iran. I don't think we do. It would be very unwise, because I don't think the military right now have the perseverance to go into another war. And I think it'd be catastrophic for us. So that's one of the things he did that I thought it should not have been done. If it's working, leave it alone. The other one is the Paris Accord. I don't know about you. I strongly believe that we are the catalyst for global warming. We people are. And we are we should be trying to take care of the ecosystem, not destroy it. And that creates problems because we signed it when President Obama and we got out of it, and it too will probably unwind just like the situation because we put sanctions on Iran. We didn't sell or buy very much from Iran, probably nothing. But the allies, they prohibited them from buying oil from them. And that's the problem, and it's created a problem for them. And so I don't know how we're going to deal with that. Those are two problems. The other thing is immigration. President Obama issued an executive order called the DACA program. It was working. He pulled out of that, and then look what's going on. The other one, he had another executive order dealing with those persons who've been here 5 years, no felonies, put them on some kind of legal status. That was working. He pulled out of that. Now we have all these people coming in from Central and South America on the border seeking a political asylum, which the statute of liberty, give me your tired, your poor, everyone who wants to come to the United States. And that's based on a value that we have. Most people understand it as a value. Now, how we reconcile what we're doing right now, I don't know. And I believe that too will lead to isolation. In addition, the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed when President Clinton was president. It started under George H.W. Bush. And it was working too. And I made a statement some time ago and I got kind of whipped over verbally, whipped about it. The large multinational corporations pretty much determine what happens, whether it's foreign policy or trade. And what they do plan, they plan. But if the government plan is communism, and we believe that, but if you don't plan as an organization, you're gonna make bad decisions. You need to look at options and select the best option. And that's what planning is about. And so the option there was to create an environment with these assembly jobs in Mexico and other places in Central South America. And the belief that the Latinos really would prefer living where they are if it wasn't so turbulent and they could make a living. And they felt that that would reduce the number of people trying to come here. And we never have administered our immigration policy fair because initially, if you wasn't from Northern Europe, the Italians, the Polish, the Czechoslovakians, they all were demonized when they came to the United States. And the Irish, and they had a quota system. They didn't have that many people, so the quota system kept most of them out. Then we brought the Chinese in, along with the recent slave to build the railroad from the east to the west. And then once that was done, well, we began to do things to demonize the Chinese people. And then when we got involved in World War II, we put the Japanese some kind of account during that period of time. But this didn't happen either under President Trump. This happened during those times. So those are some of the things he's doing in the tariffs that he's putting on China and other places. Tariffs we recognize after World War II. You can't use tariffs because you're trading with someone. If you increase yours, they're going to increase theirs. So what's gain? And I know China sells much more to us than we buy from them. No, they sell much more to us than we sell to them. And that's what adds to the balance of trade, the balance of trade deficit and payment deficit, is because of that. But these, and so the president feels that this gives us an advantage. But what he forget, China has loaned us a lot of money. If they say pay me, we'll have real problems, won't we? Won't we, John? We'll have to tax them, have to go real high on everybody to make up for that. And so that's a problem you got to deal with. The other thing you got to watch what China's doing. You know, when I talk about Monroe Doctrine, China is going everywhere, Asia, the Pacific area of the world, Africa, and they have a different way of dealing with you. They go and build stuff, infrastructure. They do it, and they don't try to tell them to be communists or what. We have a propensity to want people to be like Americans, and we don't know their culture and their history. And too many Americans don't know our own culture and history. And if you're going to work with people, you've got to understand their history and culture to know how to be very, be somewhat objective in dealing with it. And that's a big problem we have. And when I said that President Trump seems to ignore the history, is I think he, like Vice President Cheney and Mr. Rumsfeld, think the United States is invincible. But we owe almost 23 trillion. Nobody else in the world owe that much money. We haven't won a war since World War II. We spent a lot of money. And so, in reality, don't anyone hardly fear us. And so we talk about the situation in Libya, what happened when President Obama was there. But President Reagan tried to kill Gaddafi. He just wasn't where the CIA said he was supposed to be. He wasn't there. And because when he went back, they had to change all those agreements for oil. And Libya had the best oil in the world. I mean, they didn't have the quantity that they have in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran, but it was the best quality oil. And that's what we were involved in, controlling that. And obviously, you're not going to control it. And so that's when the things started getting a bit, and what I heard during the time, I don't have all the tools to get out, but it seemed like there was some disgruntlement within Libya. And I guess what the people we decided to work with was probably the wrong group. And so that's probably what that situation is. President Trump has cast the world largely made by the U.S. as the greatest enemy. Everything internationally that exists as organization were created by the United States. And it was sold to everybody, even Russia, China, to be members of that. So that's what I'm talking about. In a brutal zone of ungrateful allies, terrorists disguised as immigrants, globalism takes the world all at once. One market, one ecology, one shared responsibility. And it has risen to coincide with amazing degree. In 1981, 40% of the world's population was living in poverty. Today, 10%, according to what's reported, are living in poverty in the world. So, like I said, the multinationals, they plan to make things happen, and they do talk about poverty. And so it seems to be working from there forward. From the U.S. is not an island. We are more a network into the rest of the world than any other country. And I don't think that that's going to go away. President Trump's first action relative to foreign policy was to revoke everything created by President Obama. And I've gone through that. And I pointed out the way he was going with Cuba, I think, was better than the way it's going right now. Now we're trying to re-establish relationship, because Cuba has really never done anything to us, but we'll try to do some things to do that. And a point I want to make, the Iranians really have more of a beef against us than we have against them. The CIA has army. It started a revolution in Iran, put the Shah in power. The Shah did everything the United States told him to do. And when Khomeini came back, he had to go. And then it changed their culture. That's what I'm saying. Culture is important. And the culture of Iraq and Iran goes back before God, before Christ. And they aren't going to buy into our culture. They feel that theirs is better than ours. We just have to accept that the way they are and try to work with them and trade in a fair way that we both benefit. and not try to have a hegemony over it. And that's the big problem. I've gone through all these things that President Trump has done. And I just want to make a statement. England, you know, we fought England. And as I look at history, if it hadn't been for France, we may not have won the Revolutionary War. Their navy saved us. And we have problems with France, basically because they won't let us tell them what to do. And the current president, President Trump, I thought that was a love in, but it didn't work out that way. So we shouldn't demonize people that have helped us in critical times. We should work with them. If they can't trust us to be fair, why would they deal with us? There's no point. And that's what I'm saying. We are not self-sufficient. A lot of things that we need for our high tech has to be gotten from other places. We don't have it here. And some things we have to get from China. And a lot of things that we need is in Afghanistan. And it's all in Iraq and Iran. So if we get isolated, we're going to be in serious trouble. And the steps he's taken is moving in that direction. Another thing happened recently. The ambassador of the United States from England, someone heard him say something derogatory about President Trump, and he got back to him, and you know, when he talked about President Trump has a strong position of not knowing anybody when he don't like him. He said, well, I know the guy, but he's not a good guy, nobody likes him. But he said some things, but he didn't say any more than what I had said. He said that he doesn't, to me, make wise decisions. You can't make decisions by intuition. You've got to have something better than that. And he has, I don't care what people say about the State Department. State Department have the smartest people in the government. You can't get in there and be adequate. They have a tough examination to take. Most people won't pass it. And they know a great deal about the culture and history of everybody in the world. And President Trump listens to them. Any president does. Because the average person don't have that knowledge and use it to go about his business. So I thought it was bad when he did that. He also criticized the leader of Germany. He says they, in Canada, in Mexico. We do a lot of business with Canada and Mexico, but we have trade deficit with both because we don't make things that they need. And so that's one of the problems we have. The United Nations chief blessed also on this thing, U.S. immigration policy, reflecting that she was appalled by the conditions migrants and refugees face in detention facilities, are separated from their families, and detention should not be the norm for adults either, because you see some of the pictures of what's really going on. They're just in fenced places, sleeping on the ground, and all that kind of stuff. And we have this sign, and most of those are not people coming in illegal. They're saying political asylum. In many countries, they are having real issues, and people are being killed and trying to get here for their life and hope they have a better life. And so Lincoln told us one time during the Civil War, that if we're going to be a democracy, we need to practice what we preach. If we're not going to do that, then we ought to be what we are. And we don't practice what we preach. We don't practice what we preach among each other in the United States, and we certainly don't do it when we get into foreign policy. And since the civil rights movement, President Trump has been the most his iteration has been more racist than since before the civil rights movement, and he emboldens other people to be that way, and that's not good. We don't need to be divided over issues that are not important. We need to be working together. We need to come together. If we come together, there's nothing we can't do. But if we're divided, it's hardly anything to do, and that seems to be moving. The challenge is to find a way to promote human welfare in a world with multiple centers. A progressive foreign policy based on purpose must be a principled foreign policy, one that views as its ultimate objective the advancement of peace, justice, and economic opportunity. A progressive foreign policy must entail sustained effort by the U.S. government to advance the human good in every way possible. The world includes helping to negotiate and enforce treaties to eliminate weapons of mass destruction, working to end conflict and rebuild war-torn societies, promoting sustainable development at the grassroots level, and providing emergency humanitarian assistance to societies ravaged by disease, ecological disasters, or state collapse. There is much that the U.S. can do to advance these objectives. This should be done under the auspices of the United Nations and other multilateral organizations. The real problem, however, is that for all its wealth, all our wealth, its influence, the U.S. inhabits a world in which other major powers got to have a stake in it. One of them is Russia, China, India, Iran, Turkey. We have created an environment where if we out there, then they're going to be against it. And my thing in North Korea, the people who are to be directly involved is South Korea and Japan and China, because they are the people around that area. And I think North Korea and South Korea is whether to get back together as a nation. I don't know what the contents of that would be. But if we think that Kim Jong-un is going to give up his nuclear weapons, we're dreaming. He's not going to do it. And basically what he's looking for is recognition. Let him have them, bring him in, and we know what he's doing. Maybe it can influence him through diplomacy to not, I don't think he's going to use it in an offensive way. He will use it in a defensive way. And I don't think he knows what they will do, and I don't think we do in the United States. Those are some dangerous weapons, and they're not for offensive because we may hurt more of us than them. So that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying. He seemed to lack Putin, President Putin, and the leader of North Korea. He doesn't even believe his own CIA and the FBI. I can't understand that. I think that's very dangerous. There is an imbalance between two kinds of empathy. Psychological distinguished between emotions, empathy. To feel your pain, which supports recommends military interventions and are good at cultivated cognitive. So you have the two. Some consider a psychological empathy and a cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy means that putting yourselves in the shoes of other people and the sense seeing how their world looks to them. Much of the problem of American foreign policy is simply failure to understand the perception of important actors clearly enough to calculate the likely consequence of our action. And that's what I mean, knowing their culture and history. If you know the culture and history, you can deal with it. But if you just go in there and say, be us, that's not going to work. And I think that wasn't just started by Mr. President Trump. It's been an arrogance that we have manifested actually ever since World War II. We think that nothing can happen unless we are leading it, and that may be dangerous. So if we can put ourselves in their shoes, maybe we can see what they see, and we can make better decisions. I'm not saying we intentionally want to make bad decisions, but the way we are doing it is not working. Okay. When I was in 1959, I took a course in American foreign policy. There were a couple of things that frightened me that I didn't know. One was we had B-52s in the air every day with orders to bomb Russia. That's scary to me. I said, someone go to sleep or half sleep and drop that weapon on someone else, we're in deep trouble. And I was afraid of that, particularly when I was in Germany during the Berlin crisis. And it bothered me a great deal emotionally. So we have to be very, very careful how we do that. The other thing is, when I was supposed to go and make a decision to go to advanced ROTC as an undergrad after you finished the sophomore, you had to take it 2 years unless you was physical or then you could decide to go ahead if you wanted to. I didn't like it, so I didn't go. Before I got home, I had got a letter from the draft board telling me that I had lost my military deferment. I better get an academic one, otherwise I was going to be drafted right away. And that was the year I was now President I said to send troops to Lebanon. And so, we hadn't thought a great deal about the place, the Israelites and the Palestinians, at that time. But little groups we began, because 90% of the fellows didn't go in. So we wanted to try to understand it. We found out, if you look at the situation in Israel and between Israel and the Palestinians, is a dysfunctional family. Ismail was the son of Abraham and Hagar. And Isaac was the son that God promised between Abraham and Sarah. And that's Ismail that represents the Palestinians. And Isaac represents the Jewish people. And it's my understanding during the time they were scattered all over the world, before Great Britain and the United States recreated, that the Palestinians and the Jewish people got along quite well. It was when we came up with a new place for them, they began fighting each other. And my observation of that, we have never been fair with the Palestinians. We've been much more fair with the Jewish people. And the thing brought it to head to me is when Netanyahu came over and lectured our Congress not to ratify the Iranian agreement. They fight constantly, and I don't know how long that affects people too, because the majority is starting with what they said. The majority of Israelites wants to reach some kind of decision. The big problem is whoever deals with it has to understand how they think. And I think President Carter, for whatever weakness he had, in other words, I think he had a better understanding of the relationship between the Palestinians and the Israelites. And if someone had followed through with that, we may have found a solution. Neither says that the other one should exist, but the world of them, both of you must exist. Let's find a way to do it. And but treating one a little different from the other, moving the embassy from where it was to Jerusalem, I think was a terrible mistake, and it's going to create more problems because they're doing it by ourselves. We have to watch doing stuff unilateral. We need to work through international organizations, and when we create things like we did, we have to be willing to adhere to the decisions that we make. The World Court, we don't want them to have any jurisdiction over us. But if somebody else does something, we want them to have. We got to be consistent, and we got to be fair, and that's what I'm talking about. There's much that the U.S. can do to advance these objectives. They should be done under the auspices of Globalism. However, it is for all its wealth and influence, we United States inhabit the world where other major nations. All these people need to be. Mexico needs to be involved. Argentina, Brazil. These are emerging nations. Resources pretty rich, and we need to work with them fairly. Even though we issued the Monroe Doctrine, we have never dealt with them fairly, and this didn't happen under, President Trump wasn't president, and we did a lot of these things, and that's why there's a great deal of misunderstanding between Mexico and the United States, and between the other Central and South American nations. They have everything we need. we could exist if we just dealt with them. But they analyzed some of the refineries of oil companies, and that wasn't good for them, but they wasn't treating them right. They wasn't giving them a fair price for their oil. And so we have to understand that, I think. And I think citizens need to understand that. If we understand that, perhaps we can convince our government to do differently. But when they just tell us what they want us to know, so much of it is not true. And we buy into that, then that's why things are with us. International affairs, when opposed in Washington, none of the major powers have the capacity to overrule the others. In other words, we've got to work together. I'll give an example in Syria. The reason we weren't able to deal with that is Russia and China wouldn't let us do it in the Security Council. We wanted to place sanctions on them. But China and Russia were selling weapons to Syria. So they had an economic interest, and they wouldn't let it happen. And that's a point that we can't do it by ourselves. We've got to work through the organization that we create and try to get it done. But we need to start talking about where we agree, not where we disagree. And you can work into that. And from my observation, we don't do it. The design of this route was following the paradigm of the preceding observation. Syria, North Korea, the challenge is to find a way to promote human welfare in a world of multiple power centers. We must identify the overriding objectives and persuade the key players to coalesce around an acceptable outcome. Thus, this will require diplomacy of a type that America largely is unfamiliar with. One in which U.S. diplomats bargain rather than making demand. In other words, I'm saying we need to bargain with people, negotiate with people, not make demands. And you may remember when you were young, I'm old now, but I can, if they had told me something I couldn't do, that's what I want to do. And I think the same thing with all human beings, they have that potential. And that's, bargain means compromise, reaching a common benefit to all parties, rather than demand, you gotta do this or we'll use another weapon. Most other states act on this basis as a matter of course. We must also develop mechanisms for averting the worst and providing aid to those in greatest need by securing the essential elements of cooperation from allies and non-allies. And I'm going to some things we talk about. And America has an empathy problem. We are the most giving people when a crisis occurs. We give when crises occur. We care about people, but it doesn't last long. I remember attending a meeting shortly after 9/11 in Houston. It was a bunch of religious Presbyterian folks. And we seem to reach a point we agree that we need to do right about everybody. And I've seen this, previously, but it doesn't last long enough. Soon it disappears. And that's what happened there. And that's what I'm saying. Years ago, someone wrote a book, The Ugly American, and it was based on, we were so arrogant. We thought we had hegemony over the world. And that's dangerous. Psychologists distinguish between emotional empathy to feel your pain, which supports recommending military interventions and are good at cultivating cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy means putting yourself in another person. I was repeating myself. Seeing how the world looks to them, much of the problem of American foreign policy simply is failure to understand the perspective of the important actors. And I'm repeating that again. Enough and to calculate the likely consequences. And we need to manifest empathy. And I don't think people who seem to be passively see that as a sign of weakness. But if you make a mistake, you ought to be willing to own up to it. And and people who are not able, tend to be arrogant, they don't want to talk about that. But empathy is have some reciprocal care of other people, just as you have for yourself. And we don't do that a lot, because again, we do what the multinational corporation want done, and they want to make money. And they don't care who they hurt. And we can see it in relation between employers and workers in the United States today. They used to manifest some care about it. But now, all they want, they don't manifest that. It used to be reciprocal. I have a friend that's with me, he worked for AT&T, and he gave his whole life to AT&T. And I used to tell him not to do that, but he didn't listen. But he survived. But there's still some pain of the stuff that he had to go through. Because they had a system, if they had 3 managers, they were doing an appraisal on, one would have to be a loser. And he survived all of that. And he supervised a large number of people. So I hold my hat out to him. So that's the kind of thing I think that we have to look at too. In material terms, an evaluation is the perceived legitimacy of our purpose in the region. American policy has unleashed a massive chaos and destruction and stimulated a worldwide diffusion of Sunni jihad ideology and violence. A truly progressive foreign policy would start with the U.S. renouncing for its own sake its ambition to dominate. A progressive U.S. strategy would seek to reasonably stabilize balance of power. It would do so by recalibrating relations with traditional allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia, which supports American quest. However, for all its wealth and influence, the U.S. has inhabited a world that sheds themselves from negative consequences of the policies such as Israel's occupation of Arab land, Saudi Arabia support for jihadists in the place that they're having problems right now. A more practical approach would be to engagement with all the regional players, all the people in the Middle East, and including Iran. Washington must also begin to respect the standards of legitimacy in the region, especially by recognizing Islam's central role in the aspiration of Muslims for their political future. America must come to terms with those striving to integrate Islamic governance with participatory politics and genuine independence to this end. Progressive policy would not only defend Obama's nuclear agreement with Iran, but also pursue a wider rapprochement with Iran. America must come to terms with the Muslim Brotherhood in a Sunni context, the leading transnational champions of participatory political Islam. This is necessary not just for a better foreign policy, but also increasingly to defend the U.S. Constitution, which is a threat to civil liberties, especially those Muslims and Arabs in America. We must focus on diplomacy over war. We have spent trillions in Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's no return from it. No. And so we need to find ways to find common ground, not just threaten someone to destroy them, unlike in something that's never been in it. That seems like, I got 5 minutes, I'm near the end. Okay. Acknowledge that war cannot defeat terrorism. Thus, a progressive foreign policy means ending the economics as well as the political privileges of the military profiteers. It means lifting up diplomacy over war while rejecting isolationism and recognize the obligations that come with being the wealthiest and most powerful nation in history. We need to reduce the military budget and redirect its urgent domestic priorities: jobs, education, environmental protection, health care, and infrastructure. A new foreign policy would increase humanitarian support for refugees and others displaced by war and climate crisis. It should start with protecting President Obama's diplomacy success, the nuclear deal with Iran, the normalization relation with Cuba, and the Paris Climate Accord. Diplomacy instead of war and terror and militarism should be launched. A new justice-based foreign policy would mean acknowledging the U.S. support for a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians. Should be revised to find a new approach. Perhaps this issue should be turned over to the UN General Assembly, and America should instead support a policy based on international law, human rights, and equality. The last point is the demonization of UN first. Currently, U.S. foreign policy operates on imperialist principles that are dangerous for both the United States and the world. These include the quest for unchallenged primacy, indifference to international law, militarization, extensive and dangerous arms deployments and sales, the tribalization of congressional oversight, and policy regiments governed by pervasive secrecy and lies. Therefore, a key strategy for moving from imperialist strategy to a peaceful diplomacy must include the democratization of our foreign policy, with the American people exercising their rights. As citizens in the United States in this sphere, a non-imperialist foreign policy would be based on a respect for the United Nations Charter, international law, the Geneva Convention, the primacy of the UN Security Council in matters of law, or in matters of war and peace, and the use of war only as a last resort and as a matter of national defense, and only after diplomacy options have been exhausted. The end of the nuclear arms race included modernization of nuclear forces, and scaling back on both military alliances and our military bases overseas. The democratization of U.S. foreign policy must put the emphasis on informing the public about America's real security options, including the superiority of diplomacy over war in almost all cases. It must be stressed presidential accountability to the public and Congress for all overseas military operations and alliance. The shift towards democratically centered diplomacy would also enable a new era of global cooperations on critical issues like climate change, disease control, pollution reduction, conservation of biodiversity, and management of increasing scarce freshwater supplies. That's ends my report.
Question time. Question.
Well, I got
Question
Steve
time.
there.
You get to stay there. Answer questions.
Okay.
Who wants to be first? Oh,
So Calvin, if I were going to sum up your report to us, it would be that Trump, the ugly orange American, is not pursuing the progressive agenda. Would that be correct?
Well, what I use progressive is not like, I was talking about progressive is not as far left as some progressives are. I'm just saying objective, be objective. That's what I'm saying. We need to be objective and fair in foreign policy.
Yeah, if I may repeat something I think you said. You said, well, we should be engaging, promoting democracy around the world, but we don't. Therefore, we should return to be what we are. So
Well, yeah.
what did you mean being what we are?
Well, our iterations in most cases sound good, but when you look at what actually happened, it doesn't. President Trump said he's not a racist. He appointed, the first Attorney General was a former Ku Klux Klan person. He appointed people that denials in climate change. That's what I'm talking about. We hold ourselves, our values are good, but if we live by them. And I'm saying if these are our values, we either live by them or not. Let's say we're just like Russia and China. We did have a military exercise similar to what China and Russia did.
Don't you think there's a huge disconnect between the American people's values and the values of the multinational corporations that seem to run things?
It's a great value, a great difference. It's a wide. I don't like to say this, but we are kind of narrow-minded. We believe what sounds good, and we don't look to see what happened as a result of it. We are perhaps have more churches and synagogues and things like that than any other nation in the world. But we don't manifest agape love between and among people. Those are the kind of things I'm talking about. And when we use demonization to polarize, divide people, then people line up on different sides, and we don't do any. You don't have nobody gets out. If we're going to deal with unemployment, we got to come up with a system to retrain people for jobs that exist. The report came out in 2016 that white men between 25 and 35 had the highest mortality rate in any, and it's because they worked in unionized manufacturing industry. They were trained skills. My own brother worked for a steel mill, and he had a great skill as long as there were steel mills. When the steel mills left, there was no need for that skill. And most of them lost everything because advertising tell people, get everything you want. And then, some period of time you got to pay, but if you have debt and you can't pay it, then you don't have nothing. And then when that happens to a man, a person, a woman, or anybody, it makes them not feel too good about themselves. And then they turn to stuff. And these men, according to the research, turn to drugs, suicide, and alcohol.
How would you characterize the effect of things like the imposition of the Washington Consensus from the 1980s onwards, the promotion of every dictator around the world, okay, and the adoration of China, which was a communist country, and yet a demonization of India, which was the world's largest democracy, actually.
Well, I thought I dealt with that, but the government like to deal with people who can make decisions, and those are dictators. But that don't do anything about the other people in the country. And they need to respect us, not the dictators. And that's just the way it is. But we don't want, if they would come into the United States, you want them to do differently. So that's what I'm saying. Everything now, it's not like it was 50 years ago or 60 years ago. Some could happen in the United States in maybe years for the world. But the minute it happens, it's everywhere. And so more people are knowledgeable of what the inconsistency of what we say and what we do. And that, we deal, I don't understand anything why we deal with India more with China than we do with India. We do some things with India in the high-tech area, and contracted with them. If you have an internet, that's who you have to deal with. You're not going to deal with by AT&T. They refer you to them. And so, but we don't do that to the extent that we're dealing with China. And the leader of China, he can make decisions for the nation. The people in India can't quite do that. The leader can't quite do it because they have some elements of democracy.
Calvin, were you aware that a female spokesman for the State Department admitted that the State Department had spent $5 billion to destabilize Ukraine? Did you hear that?
Yes, I heard that.
And that was during the Obama administration, correct?
Yeah. I'd said that before. A lot of the stuff that I talk about didn't start with President Trump.
Okay, and you commented that he doesn't believe his own CIA and FBI. Were you aware that in a deathbed confession, he, Howard Hunt, gave a confession that in fact he managed the JFK assassination. He was there at Dealey Plaza. This was recorded. There is a recording of that. It's recorded by his son, St. John Hunt. Were you aware of that?
No, I really wasn't.
Excuse me, very fine report. President Trump was, his theme for election was Make America Great Again. And what do you say, Mr. Bluiett, to those people that say that the economy is now strong as ever, unemployment rates are low, African Americans are enjoying the lowest, and I guess I'm not necessarily saying in history, but I guess in quite a time. How do you address the fact that all of these things that President Trump is touting his success, even based on your theories of potential isolationism, that he has been able to, in his, and I'm not endorsing it, but I'm just saying it, what do I say to my friends who are African American, who are leaning towards supporting President Trump in the 2020 election?
Okay, I want to deal with the first video. When President Trump says he wants to make America great again, that's a loaded word. It means to go back to a former period of time when some people were very subjective and had no choice. You look at the situation on the latter part of the question about the jobs. When President Obama became president and the unemployment began to decline, it went down to 4.9% shortly before he left office. And when he became president, we had more problems than we had when President Trump became president. So my thing is, I asked the question, what has he done to decrease unemployment? But he criticized the report of the Labor Department that he said that was, the same thing as the fake stuff. But now that he's president, it's right. I know how that's done. They count people who are drawing unemployment or maybe looking for a job. And I used to look at the job for the unemployment, and they never got one for me. I just talk with people that, there are some technical jobs that we bring people in from Asia and India and other places that have the skills that we don't have. My thing is, if we're going to help unemployment, we got to train people, retrain people to do the jobs that exist. And I don't even know whether universities are totally in sync with where the new jobs are going to be. Someone need to know that, and universities need to do it, and train students to do that. That's the only way. He hasn't done nothing like that. Now he claims the tax cut would do it. I don't think so. The tax cut didn't help the average person. If you married and you make maybe $11 or $12 an hour, both of you work 40 hours a week, that's gonna be like 43. That's gonna be together maybe 45,000. And if you got 2 or 3 children, you poor. And they get a little money, but it's not enough to do nothing with it. So I think he's just talking. He made a statement we're doing better than. I think right after when Kennedy had a tax cuts, early in his administration, I think things were better then than they are now. And he just says things that are not true. Okay. And so if people believe that, sometimes if they believe it, you can't change their mind.
Thank you. Cal.
Yes.
Hi, it's me. I just want to add something onto that conversation you were just having, and this is as of yesterday.
Question.
Yeah, I'm going to get to a question. Okay. Just to add to that, is that GDP, when Obama was president, going through the decline, was at 3%. Revenues went up 7%. Since Donald Trump's wondrous tax plan, that's why I'm mentioning this affects into what we were just speaking. Okay, GDP's 3%, has reached 3%. Okay, with a diminution of revenues by 1%. So whoever thinks this tax cut is a good thing for this country doesn't know rudimentary math, in my opinion. Okay. Now, to my next question, or to this question. Based on your historical knowledge of treaties and wars and everything else that we've gone through, who or what was the greatest time as it relates to diplomacy exhibited by this country? There may be multiple occasions you can think of. I agree with you as it relates to Carter, if he'd been allowed to finish. The Middle East may look very different right now, okay? But there were other historical things, so I was just interested in what you think America projected itself, not only diplomatically, but wisely in the world, on the world stage.
After World War II.
Yeah, with the
After World War II, the Marshall Plan and all those things.
NATO, helping
and NATO
NATO
and United Nations,
Human aid, yeah.
Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia Treaty Organization.
Mm-hmm.
That was an infrastructure to deal with issues
Mm-hmm.
short of war. And I think that was probably the apex of it. I don't.
Maybe the world's finest moment.
Yeah, it was. Because, you know, that didn't cost us nothing. We controlled the international monetary exchange in the western part of the world. And, you know, Germany was damaged a great deal, England, France, and Japan. And we used money to help them rebuild, and most of what they used to rebuild, they bought from us. So we made money on that. And that was a good deal. And they liked it and we liked it. And that's one of the things I'm concerned about. President Trump need to go back and look at why we did what we did.
He has no
Then-
knowledge of this.
And that's, we did a lot of things to help them because they needed help. And it paid off.
Okay. Someone else want to, Mike?
So the issues that appear here really appear to be nationalism versus globalism. Would you agree with that?
Well, nationalism is when you know, try to focus internally at just what you're doing is the way I see it. Globalism is the whole world is involved. And whether we like it or not, it's a global world. And that's what I'm saying, that's what we don't need to get isolated from, is I don't see those two terms as being the same. I think they'd be opposite to each other. If you just focus it on the United States, then our standard of living is gonna go down because we don't have the stuff that we need to keep it up.
But
Now, globalism is something that a lot of people misunderstand. They say, well, that's why the cause of jobs being relocated is because that's what the multinational or corporation want.
so NAFTA and GATT had nothing to do with it.
But
So NAFTA and GATT had nothing to do with the.
well, GAP was something that preceded NAFTA. It was something they learned at the end of World War II that tariffs don't work. And so they came up with GATT as one way to move from it. And then they came up with free trade. And I never agreed with free trade. Trade isn't free. What I like is fair trade. We treat, two people can negotiate something and they both can be winners, not one loser.
Were you aware that during the last year of reporting, when we did have tariffs in 1998, tariffs brought in $483 billion?
I'm not aware of that, but anyway, I know if you're trading with someone and you put a tariff on them, and that's concluded, they're gonna put one on you. And I pointed out the situation between China and the United States because we buy much more from China than we sell to China.
Isn't Trump trying to change that?
But I don't see anything he's done to change it. They put tariffs on it because he feels that since we buy more, they're gonna pay more. But the reality is, the people who buy the products are gonna pay it.
So you think we should have an 800 billion deficit in that trade deal now?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't followed the numbers, particularly on the trade deal. The only thing I've looked at is deficits, and I made a report on that several years ago. But if we made $800 billion that you said because of a tariff,
No, we lost it.
we lost it.
No, we lost it in with China. I'm talking, previous to that, in 1998, last year, it was 483 billion that were coming in from tariffs that we didn't get in 1999.
Well, I don't. If we got it, it hurt the people. It didn't hurt. It didn't because they had to pay it. Whoever bought the products, whose consumers paid it.
But see, we didn't have 21 trillion in debt when we had tariffs, and now we do.
Yeah, but I don't believe that has that much impact on it. I think the tariffs is a mistake, and I don't know hardly any person thinks that's wise. We owe China a lot of money. It was a big fight for China to be designated as the most favored nation. It was a lot of stuff that went on to get that done. But we should have been getting in a situation where it's a reciprocal thing, where the stuff that coming in from China, we need to be looking at it to see if it's quality products. We don't. It just comes in and people buy it, and some of it may be making us sick or killing us. We don't know, and no individual can know that. So if China had the upper hand, I think it's good to be dealing with China and Russia when Nixon came in with detente. I think that was good. You can't just ignore a nation like Russia, and you can't ignore a nation like China or India or Turkey or Brazil or Argentina or Mexico. You can't ignore those people. You need to deal with them directly. And that's all I'm saying. Deal with them directly, work through international organizations, and maybe we can get these problems done. Because, I didn't follow anything about, I just know that the research said that after World War II, we decided that tariffs were not the way to go. Then we came up with GATT, and that didn't work. Now we came up with NAFTA. But I tried to point out the hidden thing that most people don't know, is they wanted to keep the people from coming to the United States from Mexico and Central America. And so if they could make money, most of them want to be there anyway. If they could make a living and wouldn't be threatened with their life, they'd rather be there. So that's what the planners were trying to do. It didn't happen that way because we have deficit with both Canada and Mexico. But if we don't trade with Mexico, a lot of stuff we won't have.
I just had a quick question.
Mhm.
There is a time
Can you
for
speak into the
rebuttal.
mic?
There is a time for rebuttal, correct?
Yes.
I'd like to hear more of what John has to say, but I kind of find it a little distracting at the moment. I'd like to have him have the floor whenever the time comes, John.
That'll count.
Okay, you just commented that you can't ignore Russia. Isn't this what Trump has been forced to do with these accusations of Russian collusion?
Well, I heard the Mueller report to Congress the other day, and he said Russia did interfere in the election. They are now, and they did it on behalf of President Trump. Now, he said that's not true, but that's what Mueller's report stated.
I think we're out of questions.
Yep.
I think you get to sit down.
I'm about ready.
Now it's your turn to talk, so whoever wants to get up here and respond to what the speaker has had to say, you're on. So anyway, you have to be for or against what he had to say, it doesn't matter.
Well, okay. Okay, Margaret, I'll say a few words. I think the election of Trump really pointed up a lot of socio-economic problems, really. I think The fact of the matter is, I think the underlying American public know what's wrong. They realize that the standard of living is not where it should be. They know that they get in the wrong end of the deal with trade, for example, and they know they're losing their well-paying jobs. So this is why, and of course, both major parties ignored this, because basically both parties are in the pay of either Wall Street or multinational corporations. Basically, you had the government captured by the corporate world. And I think that this is not quite fully understood, but I think it's generally becoming understood. Certainly they know there's a problem. Okay, so I think this is why, so Trump comes along, I think he correctly diagnosed the problem. The problem is that his solutions are totally farcical and won't work. I think, as Calvin just said, we really need, basic need is to reinvest in this country. It's people, because it's the people that make the country. It's the people that create the wealth. It's certainly not the CEOs that run the corporations. I've seen them close up, and most of them they get arrogant, they feel self-important, and a lot of the times they just don't know what's going on in their own companies, because nobody will tell them the truth about things. All right, and Xerox was a prime example. They wouldn't listen, they didn't want to know, and they made the most ridiculous decisions that you'd ever come across. And no matter what you said, you know, you're an underling, and you certainly weren't earning 10 million a year, so, you know, who are you? But anyway, so we know something's wrong, but we don't have an adequate solution to it. Now, so then we get to foreign policy. Well, basically, America has been running a very peculiar foreign policy for a long time. What the West and the people in the Western Europe knew about America was well understood, actually. It was almost totally unknown to Americans because they were fed, you know, the mantra and the dogma of free markets, free trade, wonderful capitalism. But what we understood was that America had a penchant for dealing in an underhand way with dictators, because their main enemy, I suppose, was socialism that might occur in these foreign countries. And so anybody that was a right-wing dictator who would put down dissent was immediately welcomed. And this went on and on. And then you had the famous Washington Consensus that was dreamt up in the 80s, that basically, if you've ever come across the diary of an economic hitman, you know the way that worked. Firstly, you one way or another, you make these Latin American countries and other countries accept loans, and then after a while, through the activities of the CIA, etc., they can't pay back, and then you've got them. And so then you say, well, what you've got to do is cut back all public spending, because this country, you see, has a mania for austerity. And of course, austerity is always counterproductive. And of course, that's the main problem I have with the EU and Europe, run by the Germans. They love austerity, and they forced it on, for example, on Greece and Spain and etc. And you've seen austerity being forced on the ordinary working people of this country. And it's also been forced on the populations of Latin America, South America, and so on. And it goes like this. Well, okay, you ought to cut back on spending on healthcare, education, and anything to do with infrastructure, unless we pay for it, infrastructure, and American companies, of course, come in and supply it. So it's sort of capitalist imperialism forced on the rest of the world. Now that is well understood, what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think it's, now China, of course, China is a prime example of the capitalist system here thought they could get one over on China. Well, it turns out that the Chinese outsmarted them, actually. They thought they could control it, but basically China said, no, if you want to operate in China, you operate under our rules, okay? You can't take over our companies, you know, we own them, you can cooperate with us, but you've got to give us our technology, your technology, and so on. But we retain control. Plus, there's a national bank in China, and so all transactions go through the national bank. So they control what goes on. And of course, they've lifted millions of people out of poverty, but of course at America's expense. And I think all I could say about it is, I've watched this going on for 40 years over here. And I've always been talking to my friends about it because I could see what was going to go on. When I first talked about this in the 80s, oh no, it would never happen. Well, you know, it's happened. And of course, as I said before many times, England is gone down the similar rat hole. As they say, it's selling itself out, actually. For example, just this last week, there's a military supplier called Cobham, goes back to the 1920s, that's been sold off to American private equity companies. So every week, England's selling itself out. Same thing is happening here. The foreign policy is a disaster. It's a total disaster. As I said, they didn't listen to Lord Keynes, because he realized that there'd be, after the war, there would be imbalances in global trade, and you know, I'll adhere to the 5 minutes to start. I said they didn't listen. They never listen. The Congress seems to be brain dead. They didn't see, as I argued with Ted Rubin, or Lorraine will know, about the fact this Congress was isolationist. They didn't realize that fascism was an existential threat to the Western world. So they sat there and let England take it on the chin, which they did for 2 to 3 years. Okay. Now it's the same thing. They're still brain dead. They don't see the problems facing this country properly, and they're not properly investing in the American people. You know, the education needs attention, healthcare needs attention, and housing needs attention. With that, I'll sit down.
I want to thank Calvin for that wonderful presentation. These issues can get very tedious, but I've always noticed when he gives his presentation, he has such an even keel about him. And even when people come at him, which they do quite frequently, and I don't know, I have feelings about that too. If a person gives up their time to prepare and actually has expertise in an area, I don't know if people mean to be rude or arrogant, but when you come at them like, did you know this and didn't you know that, it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of demeaning. And if you have, like Margaret said, if you have an issue to speak up, that's great when it's rebuttal time. I like it at rebuttal time, but not to try to blow holes through somebody. You can get up and give your opinion. I'm taking a very short 5-session political isms class, and the man who gives the class says, he addresses the polarities in our country now, that they're just humongous. And when it's like this, nothing gets accomplished. A revolution is to accomplish something. not just butt heads and fight over something, it's to get something accomplished. Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, I remember hearing her talk about how over the years the world has developed diplomacy, a manner of countries dealing with each other respectfully. And so he says that, this professor says, okay, the way things work is you identify a problem, and then you look at both extremes, and you mark off the extremes, and then you try to find what works in between. And you can't expect to have things totally the way you want it. It's just, it doesn't work things don't work that way. And for instance, the gun issue. Well, there's those that say no guns whatsoever, and those that are for giving a child a gun the minute they're born, you know. Those are the extremes. Well, if you have a problem, mass shootings, huge domestic violence, you look at what can you do that will be each one give a little bit. So his premise is moderate Democrats work with moderate Republicans. We need both, and that things only get accomplished when the moderates are working together, not the extremes. And so I think that maybe we should nominate Calvin for president because he is so moderate in his presentation. And people do tend to come at him more than others. Maybe it's because he is a moderate. We want extremes. It gets our juices flowing. You know, a fight is thrilling. You know, it gets our juices flowing. That's one thing I've had a little bit of uneasiness about this whole thing. You know, you have to be for or against something. Well, it does bring out interesting. It makes you think about your own ideas. But on the other hand, we have to watch that we're not increasing polarities, because polarities don't work. So anyway, I guess that's all I have to. Oh, on the issue of Iran, after he was talking about give a little, take a little, it put, I know President Obama was criticized highly for his Iran deal, but Iran has nothing but military, what am I trying to say? The possibility of having nuclear warfare. That's the only thing they have to do, the only thing they have. So to expect them to give that up totally, it's not realistic. And if you want to fight a war over ideologies, there's a difference between fighting a war over ideologies, which are things in our head, and fighting a war over realities, what can really work. And so I thought that President Obama's plan, and the world's, the other nations with him, they came up with the plan that they would limit their access to uranium. Is that what it was, uranium? That was more realistic. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
The book was Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and I got an interview with one of the jackals, and everything Perkins spoke about in there is in fact true. Now, one of the things that wasn't brought up is through the Obama administration, we still were following a international policy of being the world's policeman. Are we faulting Trump for saying America shouldn't continue to be the world's policeman, while at the same time we should have a strong military. Under Obama, I got word from many people in the military that everybody was stretched incredibly thin, supplies were in bad repair, if there were supplies at all. The military was in deep trouble. One of the things going on with Trump, and I could say yes, Trump is lying, because when he actually got into office, he found that we did not have $21 trillion in debt. We had an additional 21 trillion missing. Some of that was missing from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Most of it was missing from the Pentagon. Nobody mentioned that, so we all of a sudden were 42, 43 trillion in debt, which is a much different picture. So Trump, being the savvy businessman he is, who was familiar with bankruptcies, he began using the same fudging techniques that Obama was using on the numbers, and somehow he gets them to look good. I'm seeing some progress, but I think most of the progress is simply because everybody thinks the economy is doing good, and they're acting on that principle. And I know that when we were in the Great Depression, nobody called it the Great Depression. Only afterward did they begin calling it the Great Depression. We were just in hard economic times, and then when we got through that, when we actually saw not only the light at the end of the tunnel, when we came out of the tunnel is when we started talking about how bad it was. As far as policy, Calvin mentioned the Korean War and the Viet Nam War. I have it from people who fought in the Korean War that we were not fighting North Korea, we were fighting China. Both the Korean War and the Vietnam War were surrogate wars with China. China was supplying troops and supplies, and those were both United Nations wars that we were simply never allowed to win. This is one of those things. As far as who here knows who created the State of Israel? Do I have any hands? The United Nations created the State of Israel. Now they're one of Israel's greatest detractors, and now they're saying Israel doesn't have a right to the land they're on, although they're the ones who created that nation. As far as Trump moving the embassy, that was a campaign promise of several previous presidents who then never followed through on their campaign promise. Trump did the outrageous thing of actually being good to his word and moving the embassy. And it's a really interesting thing because it's a very interesting strategy, because in Israel, Trump is a great hero. They're naming streets for him. They're having Trump parades and things like that. And yet then he is able to go after some of the criminal underbelly in this country, many of whose top people might just be Jewish. And he's not going to be facing the onus of being anti-Semitic because he's been such a supporter of Israel. Now, people either think Trump's an idiot or they accuse him of playing 4D chess. And I don't know that I can support either one especially. But the other thing I can't really take on, in 5 minutes I can't address the whole issue of the fact Trump is not pursuing the progressive agenda. He's not a progressive. Much of America is not progressive. We've been dragged along through progressive administrations, and now the American people are saying, we don't think so. Global warming? I don't know anything about global warming. I don't think Minnesota knows anything about global warming. There are several other states up there who've had some of the coldest years in a long time. And the glaciers have been melting for 10,000 years. There are a lot of things going on that I know that a lot of money is paid out to global warming scientists. I know that Al Gore said by 2013 Florida would be underwater, and then he went and started the Gore and Blood carbon exchange in the Chicago mercantile market, and that didn't last very long, but our Dallas City Council actually is spending taxpayer dollars, my money, my county city payments. Actually, that's not really true anymore, but it was. But anyway, they're paying money for carbon offsets, although there is nothing but United Nations Agenda 21 policy. That's actually an illegal act to be, that's misuse of taxpayer funds, in my humble opinion, not so humble opinion. Russia lost 20 million troops, 20 million citizens fighting the Germans. America did well in the war. We owe the Russians for our victory. The Russians paid dearly. If Germany had not attempted to go into Russia, we might be speaking German right now. Who really benefited by the whole global warming thing? Here's the irony. It's the 1% of the 1%. If you look at the leaders of the global warming agenda, these are all extremely wealthy people, or people on the top of this council or that council. It's not the regular people. A statement was made, no one is above the law. We keep getting the comments, no one is above the law. Doesn't that apply? Okay, I'm out of here.
As it relates to Trump's foreign policy, first off, any president who claims that Tanzania and Namibia are countries and that Africa is actually a country shouldn't be leading an individual country, much less making their presence known on the world stage. But in any case, NATO, and there's nothing, by the way, progressive agenda-wise as it relates to having a sound and civilized foreign policy communication and relationship with the rest of the countries in the world. Nothing progressive about that. In fact, even though the very hard right in this country somehow would like to transplant us back to life in the 50s when white was a bright tomorrow, okay, we would, and that's why I asked Calvin about the diplomacy, we would do much better to take our stance on how we interact with the world back to the post-World War II stage. Because not only did we speak eloquently to many causes, but it did throw us into the stage of being a world leader, not because of might, but because of right, okay? Right now, today, when NATO was formed in 1949, we had 12 founding members. Today, NATO has 29 members, okay? Why was NATO formed, okay? It was agreed that we should all play nice with each other going forward, okay? And as time went on, and also because Russia didn't look as nice as we might have thought they would be after fighting Hitler, and so that was also merged, not only to keep Europe in packed together and play nicely with each other, but also to be a force against Russia should they become more aggressive. Well, now we're 29 members in, Cold War has come and gone, okay, and right now, Russia is very, very dangerous, not only for what we have experienced with an invasion of our own election process, okay, but who Russia is making friends with. That would be China, they're merging, okay, even though they had a relationship in the past and then they broke up, they're back together again now, all right? Korea is attached to China, North Korea, but also they're getting very buddy-buddy with Turkey. Turkey's a NATO country. Okay, so where does Turkey go if Russia wants to cause trouble down the road? And by the way, we have bases in Turkey. And on those bases and throughout Europe, we have rockets. And guess where those rockets are aimed? I used to work for USERA in Heidelberg, Germany. They're all aimed north, northwest, northeast, what have you. Okay, so, and Russia also coming over now was bad enough with Cuba, right? Now they're in Venezuela. High-fiving, you know, the murderous butcher out of Saudi Arabia, who Trump has done zero about, okay, even though he brutally murdered a journalist, okay? Russia's also chummy with Iran, okay? So what's going to happen when maybe one of these people get offended by us? Is Russia going to jump in? Or if we offend Russia, or vice versa? Are all these people going to jump in now? And so much for NATO. It's really, really dangerous what's going on. China is also taking over the China Seas. All right, and you know, but Trump wasn't going to have anything to do with the Trans-Pacific Pact. I don't know the full acronym. Trade. Okay, that would have sent a lot more business and trade directly with Vietnam, Japan, Australia, what have you. No, that was scrapped by Trump. Okay, brilliant, okay? He's the only one, by the way, that thinks he's a stable genius, because he's the only one that mouths the words, unless his sycophantic cabinet has to sit there and praise Allah as he, you know, during cabinet meetings, with the press present, of course. So this is really, really dangerous times, okay? And also, as it relates to Iran, and us not being in any kind of agreement with it, and what else is going on in the Middle East, and of course everyone hates Israel anyhow, so we've already messed up, and I mean the United States has messed up the Middle East dramatically with the Iraq war, causing massive refugee issues that have barreled over into Europe, displaced people, ripped them of their culture, and then of course they're absolutely abhorred in these new countries because they dare to practice their culture there. We've done the world no favors as it relates to our foreign policies, okay? The Foster's brothers, you know, John Foster Dulles, and sorry I said Foster brothers, and Alan, absolute maniacs. People in this country hear the word communist and they haven't a clue what they're talking about. They have, just because, you know, the revolution in Russia, okay, happened to do in the Tsar and his family, they had no idea of the appalling conditions these people worked under or lived under. Same with, what is it, in China? And Mao and the Chinese, you talk about, you know, their tenacity, and they made the rules. Well, yeah, people who fought a revolution, walked thousands of miles, and drank their own urine to survive, you bet at the end of that they're going to make their own rules. Okay, so really people need to educate themselves on what a communist revolution is, and then how communism is a political philosophy that doesn't have a very long haul attached to it. Because once you take over and feed the masses, then attempt to educate them, well, once education kicks in, then human nature and greed come into play. And you don't think about the community per se, you think about the individual. So some form of capitalism is going to ultimately come to the forefront. Now, in China's case, and certainly in Russia's case as well, most of that fortune rises to the top, okay? So, and you may get a middle class out of there, okay, of some sort. So, with regard to the Middle East and what we do, all we're doing is aggravating the Middle East problem as well by putting the stupid embassy in Jerusalem, and that was only political pandering to begin with. And if push comes to shove, and they start to get, any of these countries start to get aggressive around Israel, at the end of the day, it really won't matter. The Middle East will not be a problem because Israel will take all of those countries out with it as it's going down. Because it truly meant never again after the Holocaust. Okay, so this is, we're sitting on little time bombs here. And diplomacy is absolutely warranted, and with intelligent people driving the program. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to speak?
In response, we betrayed Chiang Kai-shek. We had, it's spoken of in W. Cleon Skousen's book, The Naked Communist. And we really did betray Chiang Kai-shek, and Mao got in there, and I would say 80 million people is a pretty hefty price to pay. And that's China's own numbers on how many people died in the Maoist revolution. In Russia also, if anyone's read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, you get a concept of how it was to live under the Soviets and how ridiculous that society could be. I am against Marxism, against communism, because I believe we have a Euro-American civilization culture which judges the individual, and when laws are broken, prosecutes the individual. And it's turned out very poorly to speak in terms of class and class warfare. I think we saw that in the French Revolution, where the guillotine got started and it ended up having such a thirst for blood, it even took out those who began the revolution. And I just thought that might be useful to bring up. The only thing more costly in terms of human suffering, human murder, than Marxism, communism, if the records are accurate, is Islam. In the different campaigns of Islam, they are credited with 270 million deaths. And there are folks in India who say we lost 200 million here. We're not even sure. We might have lost 800 million during the Islamic conquering of India. So as far as the Middle East, I know we had a Palestinian speak here not too long ago. I feel I have compassion for their position, but the position is simply that the Jewish state shouldn't exist there. They don't want a two-state solution. They don't want it settled in the sense of some kind of equity. They want Israel gone. So you have a problem. I don't think we should even ever have been in the Middle East, because you have people with millennial memories who never forgive. And you get in the middle of that, how can you ever come out on the right side of things? Thank you.
Long time no see, Albert.
Hi, how are you? Calvin, you always give a very good presentation. I can't agree with all of it, but still, I think you do a very good job. But that's why we're here, it's College of Complexes.
Because we're complex.
Yes. Concerning NAFTA and GATT, before those happened, corporations in the United States stayed here. And they had tariffs because when a company would produce a car in another country, say, at virtually slave labor, they could send it over here and compete against ours at a lot cheaper rate. So a tariff was put on it to bring it up to even competition. And that's what tariffs were all about, not to just go tag this country and get money here and there. It was put on products, not corporations, but products of those corporations, to make them compete evenly in the United States. When NAFTA and GATT were put in, and NAFTA was started by George Bush Sr. and signed in by Clinton, thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of American jobs vanished from the United States and went abroad to where they could then get back into this cheap labor. I mean, what that did was it fed the greed of the industrial complex. I think one of the greatest political speeches ever made was Eisenhower when he was leaving office, warning us about the military-industrial complex. And to me, that's the military-industrial banking complex. And that needs to be understood very clearly. Wars. We should never even been in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin has been proven to have been a fraud, a slap in the face that was not even there. Those ships were never attacked by North Korea. And that's been admitted by politicians.
North Vietnam.
I'm sorry, North Vietnam. And I had a friend who told me now this is hearsay, but it fits with the logic of a lot of things. He had a friend in Army intelligence who told him that he saw enough paperwork come across his desk that he knew there was going to be a war in Southeast Asia. And he knew that it was planned that, not estimated that, but planned that 50,000 Americans would die in that war. Well, we lost 58,000, so it worked out very well for that planning. There is a lot of interesting thought behind things like UN Agenda 21. And if you look at the Georgia Guidestones, maintain the Earth at a sustainable population of under 500 million, you will realize what these dark state people are up to. They want to kill most people on Earth. There's a good video that I think everybody ought to look at and think about. It's called Immigration by the Numbers. You can look it up on YouTube. Immigration gumballs are by the numbers. The population of the Earth is expanding at such a rate that we cannot survive as what we have here in this country if we take in all those immigrants, because they will flood us completely. And our entire way of life, it'll disappear. And we have been an example to the world in what we have done through what our founding fathers gave us with the Constitution. And we need to make sure that our students study and understand that Constitution and adhere to it, and it does not need amendments. We do not need to. Those people were smarter than most people who teach in college today, in my opinion, our founding fathers. They knew that if we ever turned the money over to a private bank that through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will go up around it, i.e. the Federal Reserve, they will steal all the property from people. And look what's happened with all of these recessions and so forth. People lose their homes, their businesses, and on and on and on. People who come for political asylum, they still have to go in the ports of entry legally in order not to be illegal aliens. They're still illegals if they don't do that. We have a process that needs to be followed. And that means you get in line and take your turn, because we can't take them all in. And if we try to do that, we're going to be totally bankrupt in this country. And I'll tell you what, the best examples of what socialism does, you can see in Russia and Germany and so forth. Those people who con you into thinking they're going to do all these wonderful things for you, get power, and greed and lust for power is the greatest opiate in human consciousness. And they get rid of the people who are going to be the most disappointed with them, and that's the ones who got them in there. In, what was it, in South Vietnam, after we left there?
2.5 million. 2.5 million.
Yeah, and they rounded up in one night 7,000 people and took them out in the field and shot them, because they knew they'd be the greatest disappointed people who would resist the government they were putting in. CIA and FBI, I think this whole BS of the Russian collusion scheme was a cover-up for what Hillary Clinton did as Secretary of State in Uranium One, 20% of our uranium going to Russia. That, in my opinion, is total treason, and she should be prosecuted according to the law for that. And I think the Russian collusion story, which it's been very evident that there's nothing to it, that it was designed to impede Trump's progress in doing anything that he wanted to do, to try to stalemate that government and to cover up what the Clintons had done. After that Uranium One transfer of that uranium, Bill Clinton went over there and got paid $500,000 for giving a speech. This is outrageous. And the Clinton Foundation received millions of dollars after that. It's just, those people have, well, I'm not going to go any further into them. Let's talk about Syria and Assad. Assad, to my understanding, is the only leader in the Middle East who actively protects Christians and Jews in his country. And we wanted that country. We wanted to get rid of him because he resisted putting a pipeline through there, which would sell natural gas up to Europe and knock out Russia's sale of natural gas into Europe. And Assad didn't want that pipeline going through there. And that's been the biggest thing about Assad, why he's so bad. ISIS are the ones who use chemical weapons against the people there, not Assad. Assad's background is a medical doctor. Any people who've gone over and actually interviewed him realize that what we've been saying in our news media, if you want to believe it, is just not true. The CIA and the FBI have been corrupt as hell through these last years. With that Uranium One, with the Russian collusion BS. A lot of people need to be prosecuted, and I think some will be soon. I hope so.
That's it.
You're cutting me off?
No.
Yes. You got
Tom is saying 5 minutes. I have no
I know.
justification for
Anyway,
going
it can go on and on.
I just want to take 1 minute to say that the Russian collusion and Russian infiltration of our electoral system is not a hoax, okay? And not only is it not a hoax, okay, because I believe every word that came out of Mueller's mouth, for backup support, okay, Mitch McConnell has a $3.5 million PAC run by a Russian oligarch connected to the Russian government. Okay, he also landed a contract, or there is a Russian company that built a $220 million facility in Kentucky. Okay, the fact that Mitch McConnell won't even allow the protection of our elections by blocking that bill this week, that would have guaranteed that one, we have proper election securities. It's a federal mandate, not a state deal. And that paper ballots is always going to be the safest way to go. And secondly, that the second requirement within this bill was that if anyone was ever contacted by a foreign country in an election, that they are to report it to the FBI. Okay, because obviously none of that happened in this last go round. So I just wanted to say that, and it's there's enough information out there, okay, that would probably go well beyond 428 pages. Thank you.
I guess I'm the last one standing. Anyway, I gotta thank our speaker. I thought he did a great job here tonight. Got us all thinking. Look at all the response that you had here. It's really good. I look at the future, what we hold. You brought up different things that I had a whole thing here. Anyway, consider that climate change is a real part of what is really adversely affecting us, and it's growing worse by the day. However, it's only part of the onslaught we face. Machines replace people. Machines don't pay taxes. This is going on around the world. The only way society can possibly share in the wealth of productivity is in working hours. The only way it can be done. I'm an advocate for a shorter workday, and I think that that's part of what brought our country. 1938, they shortened the workday in this country. They went from 10 hours to 8 hours. They went to 60 hours to 40 hours, and as a result, we were able to survive through World War II and beyond. If women got in the workforce, a lot of things happened. And if you look at what's going on in the world, machines do replace taxes. Our society is hurting. We have a lot of people out of work. Now we have a lot of people that have been out of work, they're not on the employment rolls, they've been out of work for over a year, and they're not getting unemployment, they're not in the rolls, they're not counted. And I think that that has to be, we have to recognize the gains in employment through a transfer energy system, but realistically itself is not first, it's not the only growth factor. Consider the bathtub industry. When mass-produced bathtubs came into vogue, it transformed everything. Employment grew to produce a growing demand. Yet eventually everybody had a bathtub. Today growth factor is not what it used to be. What we really need is an economic engine that will support all the programs such as elimination of student debt, free college education, single payer Medicare for all, effectively fighting climate change with a Green New Deal or whatever works to vastly reduce our carbon emissions, the shutting down and elimination of private prisons, and the establishment of a trade policy that works for the interests of working people in this country. We are now $22 trillion in debt or more, and the opposition is going to beat us up on how we're going to pay for these and other programs, and society will toss and turn with obfuscation not to accept anything. That's what happened at the last election. That'll happen again. What we need to, when we passed the Adamson Law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the workday was reduced. We went through World War II with that. It went beyond that. Today, if we were to take the Adamson Law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and reduce the workday from 8 to 6 hours, not cut the daily pay, and increase overtime from time and a half to double time to outweigh the cost of fringe benefits, we would reemploy 25 million people in gainful work. We'd make taxpayers taxpayers. We would give our government a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue and reduced unemployment, but also create an economic engine to drive us forward through the next generation to enable us all these programs to realize without increasing the debt, in fact, reducing it. There's a fly in the ointment. Corporations will seek to leave the country to go where labor and environmental costs are cheaper. Thus it is essential to put tariffs on goods of American corporations that seek to leave our country and then sell back goods produced elsewhere to the citizens of our country. Consider it as needed amendments to the antitrust laws. They can avoid tariffs by producing in this country what is sold in this country. That was brought up here earlier. But we have another problem to address, and that is the corporations controlling our government. It still stands we have the best Congress money can buy. What can we do? It was a problem even before Citizens United. What will Congress vote for? In my view, they will vote for free airtime in the last 90 days of a general election, Labor Day to Election Day. The media won't like it, but they can always reduce the price of advertising during this period to make up the difference. It will be a public service. Congress will vote for it because they will be able to keep the money they raise. There's virtually no history of it in this country of an incumbent being defeated by a challenger in a general election. But then some challengers will defeat some incumbents in general elections and everything will change. Congress will end up representing the people who do the electing instead of representing those who buy their votes in Washington, D.C. That's what we need. Then we will have no problem putting tariffs on goods that are manufactured elsewhere. We can create an economic engine that will stand the test of time by shortening the workday and consider shortening the work week without any loss of pay, without fear of corporations packing their bags and leaving the country. We'll have addressed the rigors of automation. We can implement the many programs we need with a full society that will back us up. I think I'll quit right here. Thank you. And give it back to our speaker.
Well, I want to thank you for your rebuttals. I just want a couple of things, make a couple of statements. The young lady that made about, I guess everybody see a person. I try to look at everybody objective. And I watched President Trump 20 years before he ran for president. And I found him amusing, but not credible. And I don't see him any different today. He did, that was done. And it was documented in Mueller's report that they did, and they still are. And they interviewed the director of the FBI, and he said the same thing. And we need to do something to do it. We have interfered in elections in other countries, and that's what I'm saying about it. In equity, we need to practice what we preach. I think that's a real important thing. President Trump is a very discerning person. He never tells the truth. And I can't understand how the most religious people in the world support him. And I don't understand that. But dealing with the Israel thing, some stuff I've read about Christians who support, Israel, is because they feel it's Amagajam, that time when most of the Jews will be killed and the remainder will be made Christians. That's what they're looking at. And I think that's a terrible thing to be doing as Christians. But the thing, England and the United States, which was a part of the United Nations, what created the new nation there in Israel after World War II. Now that's been very, very objectively documented. The United Nations was there. They probably did it through the United Nations, but they are the major actors in that. I defend anybody's right to believe what their information tell them to believe, and that's what I do. What I believe, and if I don't have a compelling reason, I continue to believe it. I thank you for all your comments. It didn't make me angry. Have a good day.
Well, that's it for tonight. They kick us out of here at 10:30. That's when they close. Our speaker's here. We want to talk to them. And see you all next week, hopefully.